Sophie Bennett wiped down the counter at Rosie's diner for what felt like the 100th time that day. Her back ached from being on her feet since 6 in the morning. The lunch rush had finally died down, leaving behind sticky tables and the lingering smell of French fries and coffee. "Order up," called Hank from the kitchen, sliding a plate of meatloaf across the pickup counter. Sophie tucked a strand of brown hair behind her ear and grabbed the plate. This was her life now, carrying plates, filling coffee cups, and counting tips at the end of each shift. Not exactly what she dreamed of when she was younger, sketching under the big oak tree in her backyard, imagining her artwork hanging in fancy galleries someday. But dreams cost money, and money was something Sophie never seemed to have enough of. Between rent for her tiny apartment and the mounting medical bills from her mother's illness last year, her paychecks vanished almost as soon as they landed in her account. At 28, Sophie had become an expert at stretching every dollar and smiling through the exhaustion. "You need to take a break, honey," said Betty, the older waitress who'd taken Sophie under her wing when she started at Rosie's 3 years ago. "You're working yourself into the ground with these double shifts." Sophie shrugged. Bills don't pay themselves. She glanced at her watch. Only 4 more hours to go. The bell above the diner door jingled and Sophie turned, expecting to see the usual afternoon crowd. Truck drivers passing through town or local shop owners grabbing a late lunch. Instead, she spotted a small figure slipping quietly into booth 12, the one tucked away in the corner where the overhead light flickered on and off. Sophie grabbed a menu and made her way over. As she got closer, she realized it was a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting alone. The child wore a navy blue dress with a white collar that looked like it belonged in a fancy private school, not a roadside diner with cracked vinyl seats. "Hi there," Sophie said, setting the menu down. "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl looked up, and Sophie was struck by how serious her eyes seemed, like they belonged to someone much older. "No," the girl replied softly, "just me today." Sophie glanced around the diner, expecting to see a parent making a phone call outside or using the restroom. But there was no one. "I'm Sophie," she said, sliding into the booth across from the child. "What's your name?" "Lily," the girl answered, her small fingers tracing patterns on the laminated tabletop. "Lily Pierce." Sophie noticed the girl's perfectly braided hair and the tiny pearl earrings in her ears. Everything about her screamed well cared for, yet here she was, all alone in a diner at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. "Well, Lily Pierce, what brings you to Rosie's today?" Sophie asked, setting aside her professional waitress persona. Something about this child tugged at her heart. Lily shrugged. "My nanny dropped me off. She's shopping at the mall across the street. She said I could get a snack while I wait." Sophie frowned. "She just left you here." The mall was at least a 10-minute walk away. "She does that sometimes," Lily said, as if it were perfectly normal. "Can I have a chocolate milk and some French fries, please?" Sophie nodded, writing down the order even though she didn't need to. "Coming right up." She hesitated before asking, "Do you go to school around here?" "I don't think I've seen you before." "I have tutors at home," Lily explained. "Dad says regular school isn't challenging enough." She said this without pride or disappointment, just stating a fact. Sophie placed Lily's order and kept an eye on her while serving other customers. When the fries were ready, instead of just dropping them off, Sophie brought them over with a bottle of ketchup and slid back into the booth. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" "My feet are killing me," Sophie said with a smile. Lily's face brightened. "I don't mind." That simple exchange was the beginning. Neither Sophie nor Lily could have known that this chance meeting in a corner booth of a tired old dino would change both their lives forever. Sophie had no idea that the quiet little girl carefully dipping her fries in ketchup was the daughter of one of the richest men in the country, or that by showing simple kindness to a lonely child, she was setting in motion events that would turn her world upside down. Sophie didn't expect to see Lily again after that first meeting. Kids like her, with pearl earrings and private tutors, didn't usually become regulars at places like Rosie's Diner. But the very next Thursday, there she was, sliding into the same corner booth, her small hands folded neatly on the table. "Hi, Sophie," Lily called out, a hint of excitement breaking through her usual polite reserve. Sophie couldn't help but smile. "Hey there, Miss Lily. Back for more fries?" Over the next 3 weeks, Lily showed up like clockwork every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Sophie started saving her break times for those visits, telling Betty she'd cover an extra closing shift in exchange for 15 minutes off when the little girl arrived. "Your chocolate milk," Sophie announced on Lily's 6th visit, sliding into the booth across from her. "So how's life in the world of private tutors and fancy dresses?" Lily wrinkled her nose. "Boring. Mrs. Carson made me practice cursive for 2 hours today. My hand still hurts." She flexed her small fingers as if to prove her point. 2 hours? "That's rough," Sophie said, genuinely sympathetic. "What about after lessons? Do you play with friends?" Lily stirred her chocolate milk with the straw, watching the whirlpool it created. "We live in the penthouse. Dad says it's not safe for me to go to other kids' houses." "What about your dad? Does he play with you?" Sophie asked. Lily shook her head. "Dad's in Singapore this week. Or maybe Hong Kong. I can't remember. He calls every night before I go to bed, though." She said this last part with pride, like a nightly phone call was a special treat rather than the bare minimum a parent should do. Sophie felt a twinge in her chest. She'd grown up in a house bursting with noise. 3 brothers, 2 parents, and a grandmother all squeezed into a small 3-bedroom home. There was never enough space or money, but there had always been someone to talk to. "Well, what do you do for fun then?" Sophie asked, genuinely curious about this little girl's life. "I watch TV in my room. Sometimes Mrs. Winters lets me swim in the building's pool if I finish my lessons early." Lily hesitated, then added quietly, "But she just sits on her phone the whole time." On impulse, Sophie reached into her apron pocket and pulled out her small sketchbook. She always kept it with her, jotting down ideas or sketching customers during slow periods. "Have you ever tried drawing?" Sophie asked, sliding the sketchbook across the table. Lily's eyes widened as she flipped through pages of quick sketches, the old man who always sat at the counter reading his newspaper, Betty laughing as she balanced plates on her arm, the view of the mountains from the diner's back window. "You made these. They look so real." Lily traced a finger over a sketch of a stray cat that often lingered near the diner's dumpster. "Drawing helps me remember things I want to keep," Sophie explained. She tore out a blank page and handed it to Lily along with a pencil. "Want to try?" That day marked a shift in their relationship. Each visit after that, they would draw together. Sophie taught Lily how to fold the diner napkins into simple origami animals. She shared stories about growing up with her rowdy brothers and the camping trips her father used to take them on before he got sick. "Your family sounds nice," Lily said one day as Sophie described how her mother would sing off-key while cooking Sunday breakfast. "They are. Loud, but nice," Sophie replied, feeling a little guilty about complaining about money problems when this child had everything except what really mattered, people who were present. One Thursday, when the diner was particularly quiet, Sophie showed Lily how to make a paper fortune teller out of the kids' menu. "Pick a color," Sophie instructed. "Blue," Lily said decisively. Sophie spelled out BLUE, moving the paper toy with each letter. "Now a number." 8, because I'll be 8 next month," Lily answered. Sophie counted to 8, then opened the flap. "Your fortune says, a big adventure is coming your way." Lily giggled, a sound Sophie realized she'd rarely heard from the serious little girl. "I wish. The biggest adventure I have coming is a new math tutor next week." Neither of them knew how prophetic that simple paper fortune would turn out to be, or that the bond forming between a struggling waitress and a lonely rich girl would soon be tested in ways neither could imagine. The rain pounded against the windows of Rosie's diner that Thursday afternoon. Sophie had just finished refilling the salt and pepper shakers when she spotted Lily slipping through the door, her hair damp despite the umbrella clutched in her small hand. "You made it through that downpour," Sophie called out, grabbing a clean towel from behind the counter. She hurried over and gently dried Lily's hair. "I wasn't sure you'd come today with this weather." Lily beamed up at her. "I told Mrs. Winters I had piano lessons." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But she just dropped me off at the music school and went shopping again. I walked over." Sophie frowned. "You walked 6 blocks in this rain? By yourself?" Lily nodded, seemingly proud of her independence. "I just wanted to show you my math test. I got every question right. She dug into her backpack and pulled out a slightly damp paper with a red 100% circled at the top. That's amazing, Sophie said, genuinely impressed. She guided Lily to their usual booth. Hot chocolate today instead of cold? You look like you need warming up. The diner was nearly empty because of the storm. Thunder cracked outside as Sophie brought over 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate, topped with whipped cream. She'd added extra marshmallows to Lily's cup and a sprinkle of cinnamon to her own. My treat today, Sophie said, sliding into the booth, to celebrate your perfect score. They were halfway through their hot chocolates, laughing as Sophie told stories about her brother accidentally setting off the school fire alarm during a science experiment when the diner door flew open with such force that the bell nearly tore from its hinges. A tall woman in an expensive-looking black coat stood in the doorway, water dripping from her umbrella onto the worn linoleum floor. Her eyes scanned the diner with laser focus until they landed on Lily. Lily P.S. The woman's voice cut through the cozy atmosphere like a knife. Your father has been trying to reach you for the past hour. The color drained from Lily's face. Sophie instinctively reached across the table and squeezed the girl's hand. It's okay, she whispered to Lily before turning to face the woman who was now marching toward their booth, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Can I help you? Sophie asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The woman's gaze flicked over Sophie, taking in her waitress uniform and name tag with barely concealed disdain. And who might you be? I'm Sophie, Lily's friend. Sophie stood up, suddenly conscious of the coffee stain on her apron and the strands of hair escaping from her ponytail. I'm Victoria Hargrove, Mr. Pierce's executive assistant, the woman replied coldly. Mrs. Winters is beside herself. She went to collect Lily from piano lessons, only to discover she never attended. Do you have any idea how serious this is? Lily's lower lip trembled. Please don't tell Dad, Victoria. Sophie teaches me drawing and tells me stories about real families. I hate piano. Victoria's expression softened for just a fraction of a second when she looked at Lily, before hardening again as she turned back to Sophie. Well, I'm sure you meant well, Ms. Bennett. Sophie Bennett. Ms. Bennett, Victoria continued, encouraging a child to lie and skip scheduled activities is completely inappropriate. Not to mention the security risks involved. Do you have any idea who Lily's father is? Sophie felt her cheeks flush with a mix of embarrassment and anger. I know she's a sweet kid who just wants a little attention and normal conversation. Is that so wrong? Victoria raised an eyebrow. Mr. Pierce employs a full staff to care for his daughter's needs and safety. He would be extremely displeased to learn that she's been spending time in. She paused to glance around the diner, establishments like this. Betty, who had been watching from behind the counter, stepped forward. Now listen here, this establishment has been serving honest, hard-working folks for 30 years. Sophie's just being kind to a lonely child. Victoria ignored her completely. Come along, Lily. Your father will be video calling from Tokyo in 40 minutes. You need to change and be ready. Lily looked at Sophie with tears welling in her eyes. She slid out of the booth slowly, gathering her backpack and the math test that had brought her so much pride minutes earlier. Thank you for the hot chocolate, she whispered to Sophie. As Victoria ushered Lily toward the door, the little girl turned back one last time and mouthed what looked like, I'm sorry. The diner door closed behind them with a final jingle of the bell, leaving Sophie standing alone by the booth, wondering if she'd ever see Lily again. 3 days had passed since Victoria had swept Lily away from the diner. Sophie found herself watching the door every time the bell jingled, hoping to see the little girl's face, but it was always just the usual truck drivers or local shoppers stopping in for coffee. Sunday morning brought the breakfast rush. Sophie hurried between tables, balancing plates of pancakes and refilling coffee mugs. Her feet ached, and she'd been up since 4 after taking an extra shift to cover rent money. Still, her mind kept drifting to Lily, wondering if she was in trouble because of their friendship. Sophie, table 6 needs more syrup, called Betty from across the diner. Sophie grabbed a fresh bottle of maple syrup and turned, only to stop dead in her tracks. The entire diner had gone strangely quiet. At the entrance stood a tall man in a perfectly tailored dark blue suit that probably cost more than Sophie made in 3 months. His presence seemed to suck all the air out of the room. She recognized him instantly from newspaper photos and TV clips. Alexander Pierce, tech billionaire, owner of Pierce Industries, and Lily's father. What on earth was he doing at Rosie's diner? His eyes scanned the room before landing directly on her. Sophie Bennett? His voice was deep and clear, cutting through the silence. Sophie clutched the syrup bottle tighter. Yes. I'd like a word with you. It wasn't a request. Greg, the diner manager, practically materialized at her side. Ms. Bennett, why don't you use the break room? His voice had that nervous quality it only got when health inspectors came around. Take all the time you need. Before she knew it, Sophie was standing in the tiny break room, barely more than a closet with a wobbly table and 2 chairs, face to face with one of the richest men in the country. Up close, she noticed the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. Mr. Pierce, she began, trying to keep her voice steady. If this is about Lily coming to the diner, I never meant to. My daughter hasn't eaten in 3 days, he interrupted. Sophie blinked. What? Alexander Pierce ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up slightly. For a moment, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a worried father. She refuses to eat. She won't talk to anyone except to say she wants to see her friend Sophie. He looked directly at her now. I've cancelled meetings in Tokyo, London, and New York to deal with this situation. Sophie set the syrup bottle down on the table. With all due respect, Mr. Pierce, maybe if you spent more time with your daughter instead of flying around the world for meetings, she wouldn't be so desperate for friendship that she risks getting in trouble to visit a diner. She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. This man could probably get her fired with a single phone call. To her surprise, instead of anger, something that looked remarkably like shame crossed his face. You're not wrong, he said quietly. Sophie hadn't expected that. He continued. After my wife died when Lily was a baby, he paused, seeming to search for words. I didn't know how to be both a father and a mother, so I focused on what I did know, building a secure future for her. While missing her present, Sophie added softly. He nodded, surprising her again. Exactly. The tiny break room felt even smaller with his presence filling it. Sophie shifted her weight from one aching foot to the other. Why aren't you here, Mr. P.S.? Surely not to discuss parenting philosophy with a waitress. I need your help, he said, the words sounding like they cost him something to say. Lily talks about you constantly. The stories you tell, the drawings you make together. She says you see her, really see her. He swallowed hard. I want to understand my daughter, but I realize I barely know her anymore. She's refusing to talk to me or her nanny. Sophie couldn't believe what she was hearing. A billionaire asking for her help. What exactly are you asking me to do? Come to our home. Talk to Lily. Help me. He hesitated. Help me learn how to talk to my own daughter. Sophie studied his face, the tired eyes, the worry lines around his mouth. For all his wealth and power, in this moment he was just a father afraid of losing his child's love. I'll need to check my schedule, she said. I can't just drop everything. Some of us actually have to work for a living. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. Name your price. Sophie shook her head. I don't want your money, Mr. Pierce. But if I help you, it's on my terms. I'm not another employee for you to boss around. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, a real one that reached his eyes. I'm starting to see why Lily likes you so much. Sophie stood outside the towering glass building, clutching her worn leather bag that contained her sketchbook and a few drawing pencils. The doorman eyed her suspiciously as she approached. I'm here to see the Pierces, she said, trying to sound confident. Sophie Bennett. I should be on the list. The doorman checked his tablet, eyebrows rising slightly when he found her name. Yes, Ms. Bennett. Mr. Pierce's private elevator is to the right. Private elevator. Of course he had a private elevator. Sophie's apartment building had an elevator too, but it broke down so often that she usually just took the 4 flights of stairs. The elevator doors opened silently onto a hallway with just one door. Before Sophie could even knock, Victoria opened it, her expression as chilly as it had been at the diner. Ms. Bennett, right on time. She stepped aside to let Sophie enter. Mr. Pierce is on a conference call. He'll join you shortly. Sophie's jaw nearly dropped as she stepped into the penthouse. The entry hall alone was bigger than her entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city spread out like a living map. Everything gleamed, the marble floors, the glass tables, the chrome fixtures. "Wow," she braved. "Indeed," Victoria replied flatly. "Lily is in the sunroom. This way." They walked through rooms that looked like they belonged in a magazine, not places where people actually lived. Everything was perfectly arranged, with no sign of the normal mess that came with having a child. No toys scattered on the floor, no drawings stuck to the refrigerator, no muddy shoes kicked off by the door. The sunroom turned out to be a glass-enclosed space filled with plants and white furniture. Lily sat at a small table, listlessly pushing food around on her plate. When she looked up and saw Sophie, her entire face transformed. "Sophie," she cried, jumping up so fast her chair nearly toppled over. She ran across the room and threw her arms around Sophie's waist. Sophie hugged her back tightly. "Hey there, kiddo. I hear you've been on a hunger strike." Victoria cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to talk. Lily, please finish your lunch." After Victoria left, Sophie sat down across from Lily at the small table. "This is quite a place you've got here." Lily shrugged. "It's just home." She looked down at her barely touched sandwich. "Aren't you here because my dad paid you to make me eat?" Sophie shook her head. "Nobody pays me to do anything I don't want to do. I'm here because I missed you, and I hear you've been giving everyone a hard time." "I thought I'd never see you again," Lily said quietly. "Victoria said Dad would be very angry about me going to the diner." "Well, your dad and I had a talk," Sophie said. "And the funny thing is, he's not angry at all. He's worried about you." Lily looked skeptical. "Dad's always working. He doesn't have time to worry." "Actually," came a deep voice from the doorway, "I've cleared my schedule for the next 2 weeks." Alexander Pierce stood there, looking different from how he had at the diner. He traded his formal suit for dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. He looked younger, less intimidating. Lily's eyes widened. "Really? No trips?" Alexander nodded. "No trips." He walked into the room and awkwardly sat in the chair between Sophie and Lily. "Ms. Bennett has agreed to come here 3 afternoons a week. She's going to teach you art, if that's something you like." Lily looked from her father to Sophie and back again, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You're going to be my art teacher, here." Sophie smiled. "That's the plan. But only if you start eating properly again. Artists need their strength." Lily immediately picked up her sandwich and took a big bite, making both adults laugh. "I've also told Mrs. Winters that she'll be taking Tuesdays and Thursdays off," Alexander added. "Those will be our days, just you and me, Lily." Sophie watched as Lily tried to hide her excitement, clearly afraid to believe this change might be real. Alexander seemed equally uncomfortable, like a man trying to speak a language he barely knew. "Perhaps," he said hesitantly to Sophie, "you could join us for dinner tonight. Help me understand what Lily enjoys talking about." The hopeful look on Lily's face made it impossible for Sophie to refuse, even though she felt completely out of place in this pristine penthouse with its perfect views and private elevators. "I'd like that," she said. "But fair warning, I don't know which fork to use if there's more than one." "I don't either," Lily whispered loudly. "Mrs. Winters keeps trying to teach me, but I always forget." Alexander's face softened as he looked at his daughter. "Then perhaps tonight we'll eat pizza with our hands. No forks required." For the first time, Sophie saw a genuine smile spread across his face, one that reached his eyes and erased the worry lines around his mouth. It transformed him from billionaire businessman into something much more valuable, a father trying to find his way back to his child. The seasons changed outside the penthouse windows. Summer faded into fall, and the trees in the park 30 stories below turned golden and red. Inside, other changes were happening too, slower, quieter, but just as colorful. Sophie now spent 3 afternoons a week at the Pierce penthouse. What had started as formal art lessons had evolved into something much more meaningful. Today, she sat cross-legged on the floor of what had once been a rarely used sitting room, but was now their makeshift art studio. Canvases leaned against the walls, and a rainbow of paint splatters decorated the drop cloths spread across the expensive hardwood floor. "I think it needs more blue." Lily said, her tongue sticking out slightly as she concentrated on her painting. At 8 years old now, she'd celebrated her birthday last month with an actual party with kids from a local art class Sophie had enrolled her in. Lily had blossomed. She talked more, laughed more, and the shadows that had lingered in her eyes when Sophie first met her had mostly disappeared. More blurb, huh? Sophie pretended to consider this seriously. Well, you're the artist. It's your vision. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the swish of brushes in water and the soft music playing from the speaker Sophie had brought from her apartment. Alexander had offered to buy a top-of-the-line sound system for the room, but Sophie had insisted that her old speaker was part of her creative process. Speaking of Alexander, Sophie checked her watch. He was late. Again, but not as late as he used to be. Baby steps, she reminded herself. As if summoned by her thoughts, the door opened and Alexander walked in, still in his business suit, but with the tie loosened and top button undone. "Sorry I'm late," he said, immediately moving to see what Lily was working on. "Traffic was a nightmare. Is that our new puppy?" 3 weeks ago, they'd adopted a scruffy little mutt from the shelter. Alexander Pierce, who once wouldn't have allowed a stray thought to mess up his perfect home, now had a dog bed in his office and carried treats in his pocket. "It's Rocky in the park," Lily confirmed. "Look, I painted you too, Dad." Alexander leaned closer, genuinely touched. "You got my crooked smile just right." "Sophie taught me to really look at people's faces," Lily explained. "Everyone has things that make them special." Alexander's eyes met Sophie's over his daughter's head. "She certainly does teach important lessons." Something warm flickered in Sophie's chest at his gaze. She quickly looked away, focusing on cleaning her paintbrush perhaps more thoroughly than necessary. Their relationship had changed too over these months. At first, Alexander had treated her like an employee, polite but distant. Then as a consultant, valuable for her insights but still separate from his world. Now, Sophie wasn't sure what they were to each other. Friends, maybe. Sometimes, in quiet moments like this, it felt like something more might be possible. "Miss Bennet." Victoria appeared in the doorway, her expression professionally blank as always. "There's a call for you, your mother." Sophie frowned. Her mum rarely called her at work. "I'll take it in the hall." 5 minutes later, she returned to find Alexander and Lily huddled together over a sketch, completely absorbed in their conversation. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene, father and daughter, heads bent together, laughing about something. It was everything she'd hoped for when she'd agreed to this unusual arrangement, and everything that made her next words so difficult to say. "My mom's sick again," she announced quietly. "The doctors say she needs surgery. I have to go back home for a while." Lily's face fell instantly. "But you can't leave. What about our art show next month? What about Rocky's training? What about you?" Alexander finished softly. "It's just for a few weeks," Sophie said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Her mother lived 3 states away. The last time she'd been sick, Sophie had stayed for 2 months. "Of course you must go," Alexander said firmly. "Family comes first. Always." There was a weight to his words that made Sophie wonder if he was thinking about his own past choices, all the times he'd put work before Lily. "We'll figure something out," he continued. "Perhaps we could. I mean, if it would help with expenses." He stopped, seeming unsure how to offer money without offending her. Sophie had been stubbornly refusing his attempts to pay her more than their original agreement. She valued her independence too much to become financially dependent on him. "Let me at least arrange your travel," he said finally. "As a friend." There was that word again, friend. It didn't quite capture the complex web of feelings that had grown between them. When had the stern, distant billionaire become someone whose smile made her heart beat faster? When had his approval started to matter so much? "Okay," she agreed, "as a friend." Lily looked between them with an expression far too knowing for her 8 years. "Don't worry, Sophie. We'll make sure your mom gets better really fast. Dad knows all the best doctors." Alexander nodded, already pulling out his phone. "Absolutely. The very best." 1 year after Sophie first met Lily at Rosie's Diner, a crowd gathered on Main Street for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The old abandoned building that had once been a hardware store now sported a fresh coat of blue paint and a brand new sign, Bennett Community Art Center. Sophie stood in front of the doors, scissors in hand, hardly believing this moment was real. Her mother stood beside her, healthy again after her surgery and subsequent recovery. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes for everyone. "Are you ready?" Alexander asked, his hand gently touching the small of her back. Sophie nodded, too overwhelmed for words. She looked out at the crowd, Betty and Greg from the diner, her old neighbors, children from the local schools, even Victoria, who had eventually warmed up to her. And front and center stood Lily, now 9 years old, practically bouncing with excitement. "Speech," someone called from the crowd. Sophie took a deep breath and stepped forward. Public speaking had never been her thing, but today's joy outweighed her nervousness. "A year ago, I was serving coffee at Rosie's diner, trying to make ends meet and putting my dreams on hold," she began. "I never imagined I'd be standing here today." She glanced at Lily, who gave her an encouraging thumbs up. "This art center exists because of a chance meeting with a special little girl who just wanted someone to talk to. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives start with the smallest moments of kindness." The months after Sophie left to care for her mother had been difficult. What was supposed to be a few weeks turned into 3 months of worry, hospital visits, and tight finances. But every week, without fail, a package would arrive from Lily, drawings, letters, and once, a clay sculpture of Rocky the dog that looked more like a lumpy horse. Alexander had called regularly too, at first with updates about Lily, but soon just to talk about his day, his thoughts, his growing realization of what really mattered in life. When Sophie finally returned, Alexander had surprised her with his plan for the art center. He had purchased the old building but insisted it would be Sophie's to run however she wanted. "I'm not buying this for you," he had explained when she protested. "I'm investing in the community, in art, in giving other children what you gave Lily, a place to be seen and heard." Now, as Sophie prepared to cut the ribbon, she looked at Alexander. He'd had changed so much from the distant billionaire she'd first met. He still ran his company, but he worked mostly from home now. He coached Lily's soccer team on Saturdays and never missed her school performances. And somewhere along the way, between late-night phone calls during her mother's illness and quiet dinners after Lily went to bed, Sophie had fallen in love with him. To her surprise, he had fallen too. "This center will be open to everyone," Sophie continued her speech. "No child will be turned away because they can't afford supplies or lessons. Art helped me through some of my darkest times, and I want to share that with others." The crowd applauded as she finally cut the ribbon. As people filed inside to see the classrooms, gallery spaces, and community areas, Lily tugged on Sophie's sleeve. "Can I show you something?" she asked, pulling Sophie toward a wall that had been covered with a sheet. Alexander joined them, his eyes twinkling with the secret. "Lily wanted to surprise you." Lily dramatically pulled away the sheet to reveal a large mosaic made of thousands of tiny colored tiles. It showed 3 figures: a tall man, a small girl, and a woman, standing together, holding hands. Above them, in colorful letters, were the words, "Family Found." "I made it with Dad's help," Lily explained proudly. "Do you like it?" Sophie felt tears spring to her eyes as she knelt down to hug Lily tightly. "I love it." "There's one more surprise," Alexander said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Sophie's heart skipped as he got down on one knee right there in the middle of her new art center, with Lily watching wide-eyed. "You saw my daughter when no one else did," he said, his voice slightly shaky. "And then, somehow, you saw me too, not the businessman or the billionaire, but just me. You taught us both how to be a family again." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "Will you make our family official?" Lily could hardly contain herself. "Said yes," Sophie said yes. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, everyone watching this unexpected moment unfold. Sophie looked at the man kneeling before her, so different from the stern, distant figure who had first confronted her in the diner's break room. She looked at Lily, whose life had blossomed with love and attention, and she thought about how a simple act of kindness toward a lonely child had somehow led to this moment. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." As Alexander slid the ring onto her finger and Lily threw her arms around both of them, Sophie realized that the greatest art she had ever created wasn't hanging on any wall. It was this, a family built from kindness, patience, and love.